Well, let's get this party started. Very excited to be talking about work streams. This is like some fun people we got up here. And it's going to be a party. And in the audience, if you want to jump on, say anything, please feel free to jump on and say whatever. And come join us up here. It should be a good time. So kind of the structure I'm gonna try to guide us through today. We'll talk about the goals. We'll do some intros. And like Deacon was saying, we're going to talk a bit about work streams. We're going to talk a bit about contributing to DAOs, what that even means, what we like, what we don't like about it, and really some lessons learned along the way. Ultimately, what I think our goal is that you can walk away with best practices or ideas on one, if work streams make sense for your DAOs, and how to set them up for your DAOs, right? Or what even is a work stream. I think if you all can walk away with some good ideas, I'd consider that a pretty big success. And even if it just sparks some new imagination, I think that's also pretty good. So that's kind of the goals you can expect from the session, as well as just fun talking, because this is a fun crew you got up here. So maybe to start off, maybe we can all go through the panel, and each one of us can give an intro, your name, what project you work on, what that project is, and let's do something fun. Let's do what your favorite type of cereal is. All right. So your name, the project you work on, you most contribute to, what that project is, and your favorite cereal. So I can start. Hey everyone, my name is Aaron. It's super great to meet you all. I'm one of the core contributors at Govrn. And at Govrn, we make it really easy for DAO contributors to track, manage, and record their DAO work or labor contributions and push those to DAOs so they can get more fairly compensated and rewarded for the work that they're doing. And my favorite cereal is Lucky Charms, because they're delicious. Awesome. Philippe, sorry, Bebecker, Zaku, who wants to go next?
Hey, my name is Philippe. I'm a contributor to Juicebox DAO, and I'm helping out across a variety of areas, but largely involved with governance, operations, and things of that nature. And if you're not familiar with Juicebox, it's a funding protocol on Ethereum, which people use to run DAOs, but also to run projects and crowd funds and all sorts of things. And I do not really have a favorite cereal. I don't eat cereal, to be honest. I'm sorry to admit. But in lieu of my favorite cereal, I will tell you my favorite soup, which is borscht.
Appropriate substitution.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Shout out to borscht. So I'm Bitbackers. I'm a contributor to Rake Guild. I think the context that I'm here for is mostly that I'm also working on Fox, which is a way to basically self-manage your attention and the commitment that you make into multiple work streams. And my favorite cereal is the Choco Puffy one with creamy fillings, because they also turn your milk into chocolate milk.
Nice. What's up, everybody? I am Zach, or Zaku. I'm a core contributor at Coordinate. Coordinate is a tool for DAO contributors to compensate each other and also earn reputation and build culture together. And let's see, I'm also not really in the cereal camp, but I guess I would go oatmeal. Because I do make oatmeal for my boy in the morning.
That's pretty good. Do you usually put add-ins to the oatmeal, or is it you just go straight?
Got to. I put as many. I have to. You put as many as you can to sneak to a 7-year-old. So that's how we sneak hemp seeds and stuff in there. Is you put enough honey and raisins, and they'll eat it.
I love that. Enough honey and you can eat all the hemp seeds you want. I haven't put hemp seeds in oatmeal before, but I'm going to have to try this out.
Recommended.
I'd say between oatmeal, Lucky Charms, Choco Cocoa Puff, cream filling, and borscht soup. That's a pretty balanced breakfast for all of you. So if you haven't eaten breakfast, you got 4 good options in the audience right now. So cool. Well, welcome everyone. This is like a dope panel of some pretty cool people, all with like a pretty unique perspective. And I'm pretty excited to try to get everyone's perspective on these different questions. These are 4 different ways of looking at a similar kind of problem or space. So let's make this free flowing. Jump on and off of mute as we talk, y'all. But to start, like I think like a good question to even start with is like, what even AM work streams? You know what I mean? Like, what does it even mean to be in a work stream in a DAO? What does it mean for DAOs to set up work streams? What does that mean for you as a contributor to contribute to a work stream? Is everything a work stream? Is nothing a work stream? Let's start there. Like, what even AM work streams? Who wants to take a first crack at it?
I guess, I mean, to me, a work stream is sort of synonymous with hopefully some sort of a project or some goal you're trying to get done, right? So there can be like more ongoing work streams, you know, branding and marketing maybe doesn't have a final destination, but has milestones and checkpoints, or there may be some like ship V2 of something. But I think there's probably a lot of interchangeable, you know, at Coordinate, we call them circles. I'm sure other people have lots of different names for them, but the basic idea is like who's the crew working on something, and it doesn't have a sort of, you know, defined success metrics attached to it.
Did you say it does have a defined success metric or doesn't?
I think it really has to. Otherwise, there's sort of no way to measure whether you're making like the difference between motion and progress. You kind of have to have some metrics to sort of signal you to say like, are we moving in the direction we want to be moving in? So metrics sometimes can, you know, there's a lot of different kinds, but you need some way of measuring like, are we doing what we say we want to do?
So that's interesting. So kind of within a like DAO or within some kind of organizational structure, the subdivisions of people coming together towards a given goal or metric, right? You can kind of consider that a work stream. Is that right?
I would, yeah.
And I guess like when you think, go ahead, Bitbackers.
Oh, thanks. Well, maybe to add to that, I think it's not only when you cooperate with other people. I think basically you can set everything that you're willing to be productive on, or what the goals that you want to achieve, be it personal, be it within a corporation or a DAO. You can make those a work stream, right? This is something else than just taking out the dog or doing groceries. It's about like things that you want to achieve. And actually, I do fully agree on the trying to achieve a set goal and like what is my parameter to make it a success. But I don't think that it's only in a group.
What do you mean by you don't think that's only within a group?
Because, and I think this is also from the perspective of Fox, I think that everything you want to achieve costs attention, and you only have, so your attention is limited. So I would say the things that I want to have a work stream for are the things that I want to spend my attention on, that I want to achieve.
So it's not just about the goal, you're saying it's about some kind of given commitment to that work stream. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that makes sense. And again, go ahead, Philippe.
I was going to say, it's actually very interesting to hear this coming from a little bit of a different perspective. So in the Juicebox world, I might almost be a little bit in the work streams don't exist camp or something like this.
Yes, give us this. Come on, give it to us,
so
man.
a bit of a hot take there. But when Juicebox DAO was in its earlier days, we were managing a lot of objectives in a similar way. We had a database in Notion that had a list of different tasks which were categorized into different areas. But what we've kind of come to realize over time is this can be very conducive for example, building a DApp. So for the front end, we're still doing very scoped project management, kind of like this, where people are coordinating on different tasks and planning these things out in advance. But for a lot of different areas, it's I don't want to say meaningless, but sometimes, depending on who you're working with, it can be a little bit counterproductive to try and regiment everything out in such a straightforward way, especially for more intangible things like marketing or even organization or promotion, stuff like that. So what we've kind of come down to is that people will organize into these, they'll self-organize into teams based on what their objectives are, but we don't really have any centrally planned tasks or work streams or objectives in the way that some others may have described.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Zach.
Yeah. I want to totally agree with Philip and maybe clarify a little bit. When I say like work streams need metrics, I think we can get caught up in like metrics mean, oh, I'm going to make this number go up by this much by this date, or like really hard and fast metrics. And obviously there's a lot of emergent work happening in the DAO. So I would say a work stream is any sort of collaboration or project that people are doing. And the metrics could just be like, we're going to ship an MVP by this time, whatever that's going to look like, or we're going to try 3 things, or we're going to write this many things, whatever. It could be like measuring just activity. But so a really broad version of metrics, but it allows people to have some coherence, and also people from the outside to be like, oh, what's going on over here, in this marketing and branding, whether it's project group or work stream or whatever you want to call it. I think those are all synonymous. So metrics, not so much like goals we're trying to hit in a regimented way, but sort of orienting agreement on what does progress here, what might progress look like.
Totally same page. And I think the reason why this kind of stuff is so valuable in a DAO, where it might not be quite as valuable in a traditional workplace, is that, at Juicebox and a lot of these other DAOs as well, I'm sure, it's not like there's some manager deciding who's getting paid. So being able to very efficiently and very transparently communicate what it is that you're doing and the value in that thing to a large group of people who are going to be voting on proposals is super important. So for that reason, I think you're completely right. Instead, not everyone can read a 1-page write-up on all the work you've done recently, and having a clear metric and like clear deliverables is super important. So yeah, definitely agree with that.
Yeah, what I think is interesting here, I think there's actually 2 dimensions that we're talking. There's like multiple, it's infinitely dimensionable in the DAO space, but two kind of key ones that are bubbling to the top for me, which is that 1 is how do we define what a work stream is? And then 2, how do work streams actually get formed, right? And I think, and sorry, as quick side question, is it Philip or Philippe? I just want to make sure I'm right for the rest of the talk.
Either one, your choice.
You dealer's choice. All right. But I think there's 2 dimensions of work streams that are bubbling to the top now. We have how a work stream is formed, right? Is it emergent? Is it central planning? Or is it a blend of the 2? And then what constitutes a work stream? How do you actually get people together to do something? And I see these 2 things as bubbling to the top. And I guess what's really interesting to me about these 4 projects you see is that we actually have 4 different ways of kind of defining what even all of our projects could be considered to use bottom up emergent planning, top down central planning to decide work streams. But how we constitute what a work stream is could have different ways of definitions, right? Maybe in a coordinate aspect, it is the relationships between people. In a Govrn aspect, it is what you're actively contributing to. In a Juicebox aspect, it is what you're raising money for. And in a Flux aspect, it's what you have committed to do, right? And I think that's like one of the really interesting things about DAO contributions is that contributing to a DAO, we usually just think of it as like emergent or top down or bottom up, but contributing to a DAO actually is quite different. There's tons of different ways to contribute to a DAO, right? I think Kevin Owaki has been talking a lot about the multi forms of capital, right? You have money capital, you have effort capital, you have labor capital. And I think other things we're talking about here are relationship, social capital, and commitment capital, right? And these are interesting ways of how you can progress a work stream forward. Like as I kind of feel these 4 different perspectives you're going to get today. Philippe, I guess a question of like, as I think through Juicebox, has there been any experimentation done around the idea of like, hey, you've used Juicebox to fund a DAO or a project. Now you can fund sub projects or work streams almost using that same mechanism. and what that kind of looks like? Has that been explored at all, or I guess how would you think about that?
Yeah, and actually that's what we do with Juicebox DAO. So one thing is that, I'm sure many people are aware and have experienced, once you get to a certain scale of work within a DAO, it can kind of become cumbersome to manage. You'll have small communities of people that are focused on one area, and it's a little bit hard to communicate to the rest of the DAO what exactly each individual person is working on, because we do kind of have to share this burden of management and understanding. So in the same way that other DAOs will use pods or something like this, or there's some different terms for this, but we've had kind of sub DAOs form. So the front end for Juicebox.money, the main front end, is being maintained by a group of front end developers named Peel, and they self-manage actually in a more centralized way. So they have someone who's kind of calling the shots and doing things like that. And then all of the art that's being done related to Juicebox, so the characters and the drawings that you see on the website and in other places, that's being independently managed by an art studio called Wagme Studios. And there are a few other groups like this. So we have like a group of people that are building stuff in crypto voxels, things like that. So totally, and we've seen it work for other DAOs to great effect as well.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and I think you're actually hitting on something that we've also seen at Govrn a lot, which is that sometimes work streams can actually be the bridges between different projects. They don't just have to remain within its own project. And some work streams might choose to be central planned, some could choose to be emergent. But the key is that like each work stream can kind of make those decisions for themselves, and you can consent to being within or without that work stream, which is pretty interesting. It would be really interesting at one point to understand from like a funding perspective where funding comes from and how often funding for sub DAOs or sub work streams comes from the higher level DAO itself or from outside contributors that are interested. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, usually, at least in my experience, and I'd love to hear from Zaku and Bitbeckers as well on this, but usually in our experience, these sub-DAOs will start being almost entirely or almost entirely funded by Juicebox DAO. And then over time, many of them have kind of grown into their own a little bit and started taking on different clients and finding independent streams of revenue. So it's great. You can kind of have these things that start out as sub DAOs and then grow and scale into full-fledged DAOs.
Yeah, that's good. That's really interesting. And I want to kick it over to Bitbeckers for a second because I find that there's like some similarities here in what you're contributing, be it money or be it commitment. So I guess like Bitbeckers, when we think about the Fux aspect, how have you kind of seen commitment form work streams?
Yeah, so I think the Fox perspective is a little bit underlying to the others. So instead of having like these siloed work streams, you always are dependent on the contributors that want to work on the work stream. And I think if you take the ideal of having these quadratic lands, then you'll have like a lot of fucking DAOs, right? You'll have supermarket DAO, you have Uber DAO, you have taxi DAO, you have DAOs for everything, and you cannot. Even though we want to be open, you cannot give everybody the attention that you want to help them be successful in the work streams that you establish or want to fund. And I think a key component there is actually having like some selection mechanism that's kind of equal to everybody to say like, okay, if you want to contribute to this work stream or you want to contribute to multiple work streams within different organizations, how can we know that you have the bandwidth even to deliver? And I think that's specifically the Fox perspective. But we do have next to the protocol, we do have an app where you say I can create a work stream and I can fund these. But I think we're pretty neutral in who creates these work streams and where the fundings come from. So, for instance, we plan on funding some bounties, and then we'll probably create work streams for those, and then those will get funded. And if you complete them, then you get a share of those rewards. But it could also be that DAOs say like, "Hey, we want to have this delivered, and who wants to contribute?" And then we'll fund those. So I think that perspective is pretty flexible for us.
What do you think about like adding your commitment to a work stream? Like, what does that mean? What does that look like? Like, how do you measure commitment?
I think a little bit of the technical answer is you have 100% of your attention how much attention are you going to give to this project? So basically everybody gets 100 Fox tokens. You get 100 Fox, and you can say, hey, this is a work stream that I want to contribute to. It exists here. I'm staking 10 of my Fox. And if you stake 10 Fox every project, that means that you can do that 10 times. And if you want to assign your attention to something else, that means that you would need to basically wrap up another work stream or stop working on another work stream and then withdraw your Fox and then deposit your Fox in the next work stream. And at the end, you'll get evaluated, and we're exploring these mechanics. That's a little bit like related to what Coordinate does, to find a parameter that can expose what is your attention really worth. Because if you're really new, 100% of your attention can probably have lower deliverables than somebody who's like a senior. But those are things that we're still exploring. But basically, it's assigning points, and everybody can get 100 points. So basically, every wallet.
This is super interesting, and we've been kind of testing out some different ideas at Govrn too, which is like how many different ideas or work streams or DAOs can you effectively work for at the same time? And like kind of narratively, we've kind of come to this number of like 3. Like, have you all seen something similar, or what? Like, do you think that there is an optimal number, or have you kind of had any learnings around what that optimal number of like how many different things you can contribute to is?
I think this is really a personal thing. So you're talking with a guy that's really enthusiastic and has HESD. So I dive into 100 things and I deliver 10, and that's a problem. But if I do one thing, I get really bored and I become like a very cumbersome person. So my number is kind of mixed depending on the load that I'm picking up and the complexity of the projects. And I think that holds for everybody. If you look at like these corporate systems, you have WIP limits, so work in progress limits, that basically are dynamic value that a team can manage. So a team says we'll start with 3, and then you do that for 1 sprint, and then if that works, we'll do 4. And if it didn't work, we go back to 3, and at one point we mature, we gain more experience, and we try 4 again. Then you go to 5 and 6, and then we're back to 5. And so you have these WIP limits, and I think that is a very good example of there is not a magic number.
Yeah, it's good to. I agree. Like for any work streams or anything in DAOs in general, we feedback loop for learnings to take place. Zach, I saw you come off mute a second ago, and like before, I was going to ask you a specific question, but like the same question of, have you seen an optimal number of circles that someone can participate in?
No, I think, the beautiful thing about DAOs and the frustrating thing is the answer to almost everything is it depends. They're so context dependent, So
You're killing me, my friend.
But it's true, it's like you can make rules of thumb, but some people, like if they're kind of contributing the same thing to a lot of different DAOs, are going to have more capacity, or whatever. And it also depends the kind of work. Like I really think about the difference between like the ideal use for coordinate circles being more emergent, subjective, ongoing work, and kind of at another end of a quadrant is, the very deliberate, time-boxed, measurable bounties, and so there's people who are going to be, if I'm just delivering a bounty and it's like do X by this date and it's either done or not, it's very kind of cut and dry. I can participate in a lot of different bounties, just doing bug squashing and picking up PRs and stuff like that. But if it's like, let's craft, the lore of this project, it's very subjective, it's very ongoing, and it can take a tremendous amount of your bandwidth. And so, it really depends on the thing that you're doing, and how it's getting compensated, obviously, as well. Like, what are the incentives to keep you focused on something?
Yeah. Go ahead, Phil.
I was going to say that's a great point about the distinction between bounties. And Zaku, I'm curious to hear if you think that a DAO can sustainably kind of last, a workstream or a DAO can sustainably last solely on bounties. It's something I've thought about, but I haven't really seen to great effect, at least yet.
It depends. No, I think that it like if someone's making like for Coordinate, for example, if we're making this D app and we know exactly what we want it to be and what it should be, and we're sort of doing all the strategic thinking, and we just need extra hands to come and knock out these things. Sure, we can have contributors that are just doing bounties, but I don't see how there's any way for like creative work to get done just on a bounty system. And then the other thing that I know from both from DAOs and in my previous work with impact networks and really just any sort of human systems, like people really collaborate on relationships, not on issues. And so what's actually satisfying and how to get the best work from people is to engage both like their competence and accountability, but also trust and connection. And so the idea that you can just kind of chop everything into bounties and have the sum equal the parts, I don't think that'll work. I think there has to be always a core group of folks who are there for beyond just like the end of a bounty, to really kind of hold the spirit of a project and keep it going. I don't know if we see examples of anything that's successful that's really just like a series of bounties getting knocked off.
This is actually an interesting point you're bringing up, Zaku and Philip, which is that workstreams can accomplish a lot of things, but what can't workstreams themselves do, right? And if you even think about bounties as like mini workstreams themselves, I mean, I think we're starting to come to terms with it's DAOs up and down the stack, right? Workstreams are just DAOs of a DAO, right? But what can't a singular siloed workstream do? And from Zach, what I'm kind of hearing you say right now is that if your workstreams are too siloed and there's no like inter or intra workstream relationships being built, that emergent creative work is just like not going to take place. Is that like a good distillation of what you're saying?
Sure. I think what I'm trying to point to is this, like these polarities around, deliberate work versus emergent work. Objective stuff like, hey, I need this line, this code that'll do this thing, and I can really define it in a PR, and I need someone to turn the crank. I think there's a whole sort of world of those kind of work streams where it's great for someone can kind of like a low context person can roll up, can see the thing, do the thing, high five, great, that was awesome, and be done, versus something that's more emergent and subjective, like, what is our strategy? What's our next feature set that we want to put out? What does our next version look like? What is our purpose here? And those kind of things just require a different set of sort of collaboration. And so the useful thing, I think, is making sure that we're clear on the distinction, like very early on as we're determining what is this thing we're working on, having like, where does it sit on this matrix of like, time bound versus ongoing, or deliberate versus emergent. Like just to be able to understand it a little better will help us sort of determine what are the best structures, what are the best ways of doing this. I want to give a shout out. I feel like sometimes in DAO land we can get into this like everything's a DAO. Every work stream is its own mini DAO in some ways, and I sometimes worry that in our effort to like reject all of the horrible shittiness that comes with corporate structures, that we also might accidentally throw out like 400 years of really, really good thinking about how people collaborate and how to coordinate. And sometimes like having just a person that calls all the shots and people that are like, okay, great, that's my assignment, I'm going to go do it. Like pyramids can be really helpful for some things. And so we need to be just cognizant about like what is the right structure for the outcome we're trying to achieve, and not always default to sort of like, it's a circle and everyone's an equal contributor and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think sorry, one quick point you hit on right there is a key piece of this all is that DAOs don't inherently mean no hierarchy, right? I think what DAOs generally mean choose the hierarchy, you choose the structure. And the benefit of work streams is if you're in a work stream that's not structured the way you want, you can go start a new work stream with those same people. But I agree. I think like throwing out the baby with the bathwater here is a terrible idea. There's a lot we can learn, and we don't want to like reinvent the wheel, although sometimes we need to. But I actually want to go back to something you had said earlier, if you're okay with me pushing back a bit, is that I actually think that there's a little bit of a different framing for work that's being done, whether you as a contributor or you as a work stream, right? Which is, this is a bit to the question of like, can something survive off just bounties? I think that's kind of not even necessarily the right question to ask. And if we talk about like the type of work, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, creative or emergent, I think it's the wrong way to value it, right? Work is work, right? Even something as simple as like a PR or something that has a very defined parameters, it should be valued in very, very different ways. Talking about things we can learn from the old way of doing things, Bitbecker's brought up the idea of work in progress, WIP. Other things, if you look at normal corporations or normal organizations, rarely are you as a person evaluated on one dimension, or rarely is the work that you've done that evaluated on one dimension, right? You do a thing, and that usually filters through multiple compensation or incentive schemes or plans. You have a normal salary, your base salary, which is just like for you to show up, be in a relationship with these people. You have a performance bonus based off of how well you execute different things. Maybe you have a sales quota, which is much more quantitative, right? Ultimately, it's the same resources of work that you're doing. It's just being evaluated on multiple scales. And so something that we talk a lot about here at Govrn is that contributions, or like whatever your base, whether it's relationships, commitments, whatever, or contributions, are the base set of objective data we're talking about. But value is actually incredibly context specific. And it can be done via, especially when you include time as a new reference, right? So you do a thing today, whether that's a PR, that can be evaluated at this point in time in 5 different ways, even if it is extremely like time bound. But if you also look at this PR in a year from now and see, oh, what did this PR inspire? What was built on top of this PR? You could find it to be incredibly more valuable. I always like to go back to the original Moloch DAO, right? When Amin and James Young, right, built the first Moloch DAO. There's no way they would understand the true amount. If we had judged the value of that Moloch DAO back then, there's no way we could have taken into account all of the things that it inspired and built. So again, just a little bit of a change on what you're saying is that I think its value is actually incredibly context specific. But the work you're done, and that's like the better way to ask, I think, what you're asking is, it's not just about like, can bounties do it all, right? It's about like, can one evaluation mechanism do it all? Is kind of how I would stress us to reframe it.
But I think what you'll often hear is indeed like this answer. There's not like one answer to this, right? Like if the evaluation mechanism will probably depend on the context that you're also operating in. For instance, I find it very hard to evaluate creative activities because I am not a creative person. So I didn't do Mazia until like 3 years ago. So I would never give money to art, for instance. Like that was my context. So if you ask me to evaluate it, you'll probably get shut down, which isn't very fair, of course. But maybe it's a diversion in you'll probably have these different mechanics. And if you take the Moloch DAO open source contract example, that means that you want to evaluate the impact. And I think that's a whole. I think you can have multiple panel discussions on evaluating impact and how to do this exactly. But I do think maybe if you don't want to do it retroactively but proactively, in the case in the DAO, you could think about bounty mechanics, right? Where you say like, if we need a mission and vision, we are willing to spend 5% of our community token or our community treasury on establishing this. And when we get a deliverable, we evaluate it, and then people evaluate the value that they gave in this process. And then this is a little similar as Coordinate does, and then funnel that down to rewards again as an option.
Go ahead, Phil. If you want to add something.
No, go ahead.
So this is awesome. I really, really, really like this. It matches up with, I think, a lot of key things that we've all felt while working on work streams, while doing different types of work. really just like the aggregation of different work. So to kind of bring it back to kind of lessons we're trying in the chat, I just kind of started with good mechanics that we've seen so far of work streams, making, and I'm typing that right now, making sure you have cross work stream people as well. So, I put it in the chat just so we can start documenting some stuff, right? Good mechanics when we want to start work streams is like, you got to start with some kind of for people to rally behind, decide on the way of working / a hierarchy, measure your contributor commitment, right? Are people committed to goal reality? Does it need funding or does it not need funding? Making sure you have cross workstream people as well. If we talk about like the kind of, these are successful techniques we've seen. I think a really big one was something I stress a lot when people set up DAOs at Govrn is that you got to start with a North Star metric, or you got to start with like a README, like why should someone even like be joining us? On the flip side, if maybe we can talk about like what are failures of work streams we've been in? What are things that have made the work streams not work that we've been a part of or seen in the different ways? Like what has been a not successful fundraise at Juicebox? What has been an unsuccessful circle and coordinate? What has been an unsuccessful, we'll call it, whatever you call it in Box right now, these organizations? Do people see things that have proven to be detrimental? And even in the audience, if you've been part of work streams as well, throw up your Moloch.
I think that's a great question. One thing that I found a lot in my experience, because of course there are many things that I think everyone is kind of on the same page about. Like poor communication will always lead to issues. Too much central planning or kind of over central planning can sometimes lead to issues depending on who's doing that. But one thing I found in my experience is that a lot of times overcomplication can be a big issue with work streams. I think for those of us who are very involved in DAOs and are doing this every day, it's easy for us to forget that a lot of the people who are coming into this don't have the same background of, dealing with all of this crazy governance and all of the stuff that we're doing. And you can often tap into some really great contributors who are just not as involved with, all of these kind of minutia of the DAO culture things if you simplify a little bit. Which is why I'm a big proponent of having very simple governance processes based on robust distribution of voting power, of token distribution. So I think having this may be a kind of counterintuitive thing for a lot of people who get into designing these processes who want to make very complex processes, but I think simplifying as much as possible and making it as easy as possible to communicate, I think there's real value in that, especially for newer contributors.
I'm curious to learn, Philip, is this something that you facilitate with Jukebox? Do you have like a set of tools or protocols that you say like, hey, this is the DAO 101 to use?
Yeah, I mean, things will vary so much from DAO to DAO or group to group. So the Juicebox protocol does handle token issuance, which is very helpful for people who are just getting into things. And I typically recommend people to actually use Snapshot in conjunction with Juicebox. And we have kind of the DAO's governance process, and I'll often help people who are setting up their project set up their own governance process, kind of similar to that. And one particular thing that's beneficial is not to get too far into the weeds here, but Juicebox projects are expressed in terms of funding cycles, which are these discrete lengths of time that the configurations of the projects cannot be changed during. So a lot of times we find that it's very helpful to set up governance processes with these cycles as well. I think it's easier to communicate to people that, okay, every 2 weeks we'll have a series of proposals for you to vote on, rather than this kind of concurrent governance process where different proposals can come in at any time. So having this almost like cadence to governance, I think, is very useful for that as well.
Cycles are huge. I'm just going to +1 that. I think that's something that I might say that, again, I don't want to speak for you, Zach, but Coordinate hits on, we've adopted as well, is the idea of time-based, time-bound application on top of something, right? Whether you call them epochs or cycles or whichever, having some kind of feedback, using time as a good measuring stick allows you to learn and take that feedback and incorporate it in some new way.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when you talk about like lessons learned of failures in places we've seen failures for, I can speak to obviously like DAOs using Coordinate. I think that regular cadence is definitely one that people get work in rhythms, and so really finding like what's the rhythm that you sort of engage people and try and think about like how can you introduce cadence and rhythm to work streams to check-ins, so that people kind of can have a chance to get into a groove. And then the other really important one, I think, for any work stream is the framing, and you sort of alluded to this too. But really making sure people understand like what is it that we're doing here, and especially agreements and making explicit some of the norms that we're going to be working with. We've done some experimenting with Murmur, the tool that the Ready produced. It works really well to sort of craft group agreements on how do we want to go about doing this, what are the norms we want to use, but sometimes that can just be a Google Sheet or a Notion and a quick meeting as well. But we've found that when I have the chance to, for example, onboard folks into a Coordinate circle and be like, hey, this is how this works. This is how we're thinking about allocating give. This is why we write the notes, and this is why they're important. There's a lot smoother and better uptake. People really get it, as opposed to when they're like tossed into a circle, and they're like, oh wait, what should I, how do I give? What should I give it for? And so just giving everybody that sort of first framing of like, this is how we are around here. This is how we do things. It's maybe an obvious point, but I see it skipped a tremendous amount in DAOs because there's such a difference between some people who are like, been playing this game for a long time. They sort of forget what it was like to be a beginner.
Yeah, that's huge. And 2 points on that. One of the big pieces of advice I give people when they start a DAO is I tell them, think of this like an open source software repo, right? If you're starting a new Git repo, what are the things you have to start with? You have to start with a README. What does the README do? The README tells you the goals of the project. It tells you what you're trying to accomplish. What's the next thing you have to do? You submit you create a contributing guideline. How does one contribute to this project? How does one operate? How does one work together? What's the third thing you do? You create an issues template and PR template. This is the way that we add contributions to or work with one another, right? And it's just a really easy framing on how to create a emergent way or create a space for emergent types of ideas while creating guardrails on how someone is doing it, right? I love the framing you use, Zach, and I use this all the time. At this DAO, we do X. At this DAO, we do Y. And being able to have those phrases or have those ways of communicating those ideas becomes extremely important in how you onboard people to a DAO or how you onboard to work streams or working groups. Because we could all work in the same DAO, but you could have different work streams operate differently. And being able to communicate those differences is super important. It is exactly to your earlier points that some work streams might need top-down central planning. Some work streams might need more emergent design. Work streams kind of create this ability for DAOs to be flexible for very specific goals. So I think that's a really, really huge point, and I love that language used. By the way, if people still have more lessons learned in working in work streams, keep on throwing them in the chat. I've been updating that one message with a lot of things. What's up, Deacon?
Hey, no, I was just hopping on to give a quick time check, about 10 more minutes, but and I also had a question or an observation, I guess, and I put it in the chat. We have these like extrinsic versus intrinsic values, the people that are contributing to a DAO, so that the mercenary versus the missionary. And things I've noticed at times is like really how the workstream set up or the compensation set up, you can accidentally take a missionary and turn them into a mercenary. and but which is sometimes fine depending on what the intent of the work stream is. But it's just we have these community tokens and we have stable tokens. The way we pay for things and the way that like either power or money. It's just an interesting observation I think I've seen, and sometimes good, sometimes bad, but.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and I totally agree. I think it's one of the mistakes that a lot of DAOs make is that we don't realize how we're changing our different our contributors and what they do and what motivates them, rather than giving them the space to figure it out for themselves. Something we really kind of try to do at Govrn is we think emergent versus top down or bottom up versus top down is not just a spectrum, but it's actually a spectrum or a condition set that should be dynamic. You should be able to dynamically and continuously update and change how top down or emergent or bottom up you want to be. The way that the Govrn kind of protocol works is you are able to you self-report, you report the contributions you make to a given DAO or to a work stream. And then you use social and peer attestations and valuations of that work to prove that the work happened and to value how much that work is, right? So you do a thing and then people can come on and say, I think this is worth 3 points or 8 points or 10 points. And what we found is that work streams, the type of work, in Workstream, in this work stream we do, in this work Y, that starts to have this really beautiful emergence within the DAO, because people are just reporting the work that they're doing. And then you use peer grading systems on on if that work is valuable or not. And there's a dynamic slider that says we're only going to take into account one person's grading, or we're going to take into account everybody's. And being able to use that slider to understand the scope of criteria of evaluation is incredibly helpful and creates this really nice, organic, natural way for the things that we do in this DAO or workstream to emerge, which is a pretty nice way. So cool. I know we have about 7 minutes left. I want to take a minute. I lessons that I'm talking about in this chat. I'm talking a lot about work streams, a lot about DAOs, but I now kind of want to open up the floor, for five or so minutes. If people have questions or thoughts or anything that they think the four of us got super wrong and you want to, raise your hand, put your questions in the chat, jump on stage. What are people feeling like? Do people have questions on anything? If no questions, we're just going to keep on talking. So, if you're not sick of us yet.
Well, then, in that case, Aaron, I was intrigued by your example at the end because this is something that we're struggling with. So, are you already using this slider? And what do you see when you make the scope of the peer review variable? What happens? What do people do?
Yeah. So, our atomic unit of DAOs or of workstreams or of anything is actually the contributor or even the contribution. That's what we believe workstreams are built up of. Workstreams are built up of many contributions aggregated and vectorized towards a common goal and purpose, right? So whenever we think about workstreams, we actually think about the contribution up that workstream, right? And so when you think about it like that, what we essentially allow is this graph or objective data set that contains all of the contributions that have been done towards a purpose. And it's kind of this open data set. And then we allow anybody, it's like a permissionless way of coming and grading these different types of contributions. Then at the workstream level, those that quote unquote own or are members of that workstream, they can kind of decide whose grading, whose evaluations they want to include the value of that contribution. And we found this to actually it's like a permissionless way of having curated contributions, create curated valuations. And you can always be learning, right? Whether that's epoch-based or cycle. You can say for this cycle, we're only going to consider these people's evaluations. And by making sure that it's the framing I like to use is that it's permissionless content, but permissioned curation, right? And what that means is if you made a mistake in how you evaluated last cycle, because it was permissionless for anybody to grade it, and you realize, oh, we should have redone this with this person's grading, you can actually go in and fix that and open it up. And you can make an adjustment in the next time cycle. And it actually takes a lot of the pressure off of getting, because you've now introduced the ability for corrections to be made. So it's a really flexible system, and it kind of is on to the point, to Zach's point earlier, of saying like, this month we kind of need a top-down plan, but next month we need a totally emergent and open style. And that flexibility and freedom is what we found to be a very, very solid kind of benefit. So I don't know if that 100% answered your question, Bitpeckers, but.
Yeah. This is something we're also thinking about, but maybe to extend what you just explained, so with this month we need this and this month we need that, you can also think about like a DAO onboarding, right? So if you have like a bounty board for people that want to join your DAO, like DAO House has a really nice onboarding stream, like with all these channels and levels, and you can graduate. But you probably don't want people joining the DAO to evaluate their peers, because they will collaborate to all get in, or they might start gaming the system that only the one wins, the Hunger Games. But for other work streams and within a DAO, it makes a lot of sense. So I'm just really thinking really hard now about how you could play with this, and it's pretty cool. Nice share, thanks.
Yeah, one of the things that we've talked about is like kind of making it automatic. If you received a certain amount of reputation, that you automatically your evaluations start getting included. And likewise, if you become a bad actor, you can also then evaluation. So yeah, it's super interesting.
Yeah.
And with a couple minutes, go ahead, Zach.
Oh, I was just gonna like as a final point build on that and say one of the things that we're doing a lot of similar things in Coordinape with starting to allow sort of reputation flows and attesting to folks. And I think like if we zoom out a little bit, one of the things that's most exciting about DAOs and also hard right now is they are just like fundamentally more context dependent, and I think DAOs are sort of a reaction in some ways to the world just getting a lot more complex and realizing that the honest answer to a lot of things is like, well, it depends. The context, we need to take it into account. And so I think right now, my experience in the DAO landscape is like, we're really, feeling both like the opportunity and potential of what do these flexible and responsive organizations, like what's possible when we can steer dynamically and really be, context aware. And like, it's a lot easier just to have a standardized thing. It's a lot easier to have a salary band and like hire someone and say, you start this, than like, oh, wow, we're going to try and, right fit salary and compensation and reputation to your contribution. And so I think like for all of us in the DAO space, like recognizing that mindset shift is like one of the most important things we can do is really recognize that it's like we're exploring new territory here in like institutions that are responsive to context. And so, to give ourselves all some patience and a lot of love as we try and figure out like how's this actually going to work, because it's hard to do.
+1, so much truth, and it's just context specific. As we wrap up, Philippe Beckers, want to last imparting wisdom thoughts?
Go ahead, Beckers.
My last parting thoughts will be like, I think that we all have a very interesting perspective on how to solve this problem of coordinating in decentralized organizations. But my shill, of course, would be that even if we get everybody within a DAO, we still need to find a way to assess how many fucks they can give for the work streams.
I would say this may be obvious, but ultimately it's all about the people that you're working with and the people that you have in your community. I think for a while I was kind of focused on trying to make things work for everybody, and I had the idea that no matter what kind of people you had, if you design the system in the right way, you can make things work. But I've since kind of had a bit of a change of heart, which may be a little bit pessimistic, but I think this is true, which is that the people who will be best suited to working in traditional environments and the people who are able to adapt and work in a DAO really well might not always be the same people. And I think it's better to kind of play to the strengths of people who are ready to kind of take this dive than to kind of water things down and try to make it accessible to everybody, which may be a little bit of a controversial message, but I think it's true.
Zach, was that your, did you already give your imparting thoughts?
Yeah, I think I did, but 100%. I think, I don't know if it's a hot take, but DAOs are not for everybody, especially not in their current form, and that's okay.
That's okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you all. Thank you, Bitbeckers, Philippe, Zach. Thank you all for being up here. This was a super fun conversation. And I hope to, if anyone in the audience starts doing some experimentations with Workstreams, please let us know, tweet about it, talk about it in this. And thank you, DAO for DAOcember. This is sick.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron, and thanks everyone. That was awesome talk. The work streams, I think it's just like one of those key things that are like so integral to any organization. And so it's cool to see the new ways and the new experimentation we're able to kind of speed run in this space. I started thinking about prediction markets, and this is just me overcomplicating everything, but it seems like there could be some cool applications there, adding some market forces around reputation and work streams and completion and things. But anyways, going on a tangent. So we have some other talks coming up. One of the things we did with this is we tried to keep all the blocks at pretty similar times. So we have kind of opening speaker, and then we got a panel, and then we have a chance for a new project that's coming up in the space to do a little demo.